Before Canada was called Canada, this vast land was already home to countless nations, each with their own stories, histories, and ways of life. For thousands of years, it was a vibrant continent, alive with diverse cultures, languages, and traditions. Every region echoed with the songs, ceremonies, and laughter of its people. Imagine it as a bustling city, but instead of skyscrapers, there were hundreds of unique neighborhoods, each with its own rules, customs, and ways of life, all coexisting across the land. The Haida mastered the sea on the west coast, building canoes that could ride the wildest waves and fishing in rich ocean waters. The Cree followed bison across the sweeping plains, moving with the herds, and living in harmony with the rhythms of the grasslands. And the Mi'kmaq watched the first European ships arrive in the east, standing on the shores where their ancestors had lived for generations. Life was deeply connected to the land. People read the seasons, animals, and plants with incredible skill, passing this knowledge from elders to youth. Complex systems of governance, vast trade networks, and rich oral traditions shaped every community, linking distant nations through alliances and exchange. The Iroquois Confederacy had a sophisticated political system, uniting nations under a powerful vision of peace and cooperation. Meanwhile, the Blackfoot and Sioux built their lives around the bison, developing unique cultures and spiritual traditions tied to the herds. The Inuit thrived in the Arctic with ingenious technologies, adapting to one of the harshest environments on Earth. These were scientists, artists, and leaders, innovators in every sense whose inventions and wisdom shaped their world. So, when we talk about Canadian history, it starts here, with millennia of innovation, community, and resilience. Wealth was measured by what you shared, not what you owned. Generosity and connection were at the heart of society. This was a thriving, interconnected society, until a disruptive new neighbor arrived on the horizon. And that neighbor didn't bother to read the welcome mat, forever changing the course of this land's story. Then the ships arrived, massive silhouettes on the horizon, their sails billowing with the promise of a new era. Giant wooden vessels brought Europeans across the Atlantic, drawn by the lure of beaver pelts, soft gold that would shape the fate of a continent. At first it was all about trade. Furs exchanged for metal pots, knives, and guns. Both sides saw opportunity, and new relationships began to form. The fur trade changed everything, transforming ancient trade routes and sparking new rivalries between indigenous nations as they vied for influence and access. Hunting became commerce, and the balance of life shifted. Traditional ways of living were altered as the demand for furs grew. Europeans weren't just trading partners, they were embedding themselves, building settlements and pursuing their own ambitions on indigenous lands. But the most devastating import wasn't goods, it was disease, invisible and unstoppable. Smallpox, measles, and influenza swept through communities with no immunity, leaving devastation in their wake. Entire nations lost up to 90% of their people, an unimaginable loss that shattered societies. The loss was catastrophic, erasing families, knowledge, and stability that had endured for generations. With populations shattered and communities weakened, European powers found it easier to assert control and expand their influence. What began as equal trade quickly became a one-sided relationship, with the Europeans dominating the exchange. Technology and deadly diseases tipped the scales, leaving indigenous peoples at a profound disadvantage. The handshake of partnership turned into a dangerous embrace as trust gave way to tension and uncertainty. The newcomers held all the cards, controlling resources and dictating the terms of engagement, and the world indigenous peoples knew a world of balance, tradition, and connection was changed forever, setting the stage for a new and uncertain order. After the chaos, things got official. Treaties were signed between indigenous nations and the Crown. Indigenous leaders saw them as sacred promises to share the land, but the government saw them as real estate deals. Land surrendered, not shared. Two sides, two worldviews, one about partnership, the other about ownership. As settlers poured in, the government created the Indian Act, controlling nearly every aspect of indigenous life. The goal was assimilation, erasing cultures, languages, and identities. Then came residential schools, children taken from families, forbidden to speak their languages or practice their cultures. Over 150,000 children were forced into these schools, suffering abuse and neglect. The aim was to kill the Indian in the child. It was a systematic attempt to sever generations and wipe out cultures from within. The impact was devastating and lasting. These policies weren't about help, they were about control, and the scars are still felt today. Despite everything, indigenous cultures did not fade away. From the start, there was resistance, armed, diplomatic, and cultural. Leaders like Louis Riel fought for rights, others negotiated for their people's survival. When ceremonies were outlawed, traditions went underground, elders whispered stories and teachings, keeping knowledge alive. Art, music, and language became acts of defiance. Speaking Cree, Ojibwe, or Inuktitut at home was a quiet victory. This was survival through adaptation and resilience. Communities held onto their identity even in the darkest times. The strength of culture carried them through. They bent, but did not break. Each act of resistance was a declaration, we are still here. The story is one of survival, not disappearance. Against all odds, indigenous cultures endured, and they waited for the day to stand tall again. For generations, most Canadians didn't know this history. It was hidden, unspoken, and often deliberately left out of textbooks and public conversations. The stories of indigenous families, their cultures, and the trauma they endured were kept in the shadows. But indigenous activists and leaders brought the truth to light, refusing to let silence erase their experiences. They spoke out, organized, and demanded that the country listen. The Oka crisis and other pivotal events forced the country to pay attention, sparking national conversations about indigenous rights and justice. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, documented the legacy of residential schools, gathering thousands of testimonies and stories from survivors and their families. Survivors shared stories of pain and courage, breaking decades of silence to help the country understand the truth. The TRC called it cultural genocide and issued 94 calls to action, a national to-do list for governments, institutions, and all Canadians to address the harms of the past and build a better future. Words like reconciliation and decolonization entered the conversation, challenging people to rethink Canada's history and its future. Movements like Idle No More demanded respect for treaties and the environment, inspiring a new generation to stand up for Indigenous rights. Official apologies followed, but real change is slow and many promises remain unfulfilled. Reconciliation isn't just about saying sorry, it's about action, about making meaningful changes in policy, resources, and relationships. Ongoing injustices remain: child welfare, clean water, overrepresentation in the justice system, and the need for equitable opportunities for Indigenous youth. The country is awake, but the work is just beginning. Awareness is only the first step on a much longer road. Turning words into change is a long journey, one that requires commitment, patience, and honesty from everyone involved. The conversation has started, but the hard work lies ahead. True reconciliation means listening, learning, and acting together. Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples must be rebuilt on respect and justice, with a shared vision for the future. The path forward is challenging, but necessary, and every step taken brings us closer to true reconciliation. Today, the challenges are real. Housing, education, healthcare, and land rights are still major issues. Many Indigenous nations are still fighting for promises made centuries ago, but there's also a powerful resurgence. Indigenous peoples are thriving, revitalizing languages, arts, and traditions. Young people are reconnecting with their heritage. More Indigenous doctors, lawyers, and leaders are shaping every sector. Musicians, authors, and filmmakers are changing the cultural landscape. This is not just about preserving culture, it's about creating new culture. Indigenous identity is modern, dynamic, and powerful. The journey is about holding both struggle and triumph at once. Non-Indigenous Canadians are learning to be better allies. Supporting self-governance is key to real change. The path isn't easy, but momentum is building. It's a hopeful process of rebuilding relationships. The story of Indigenous peoples in Canada is one of survival and strength. Indigenous cultures are not just history, they're a vital part of Canada's present and future. Teachings about balance, sustainability, and community are more relevant than ever. Indigenous land defenders lead environmental movements, and traditional justice models inspire new approaches. Art and music challenge and inspire us all. This culture is a source of wisdom and innovation for everyone. The hope for the future lies in embracing this legacy. Imagine a Canada where Indigenous languages and rights are fully respected. It's about moving from dominance to partnership. The beat of the drum is growing stronger, a call for a better, more honest future. The resilience of Indigenous peoples is Canada's greatest strength. And the story is far from over. The celebration is just beginning.